How good was Bruce Lee really? The common assessments range from invincible to no chance in a real fight. But one thing is indisputable. The martial arts legend perfected a series of breathtaking techniques, which are still accompanied by many question marks and speculations. But how did Bruce Lee manage to send his opponents to the boards, apparently with the snap of his fingers? How effective were the wacky punches and kicks really? And is it possible to learn them yourself? Sit back, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and join us in our search for answers. 1-inch punch. Ever since Bruce Lee publicly demonstrated the legendary 1-inch punch in 1964, the rest of the world has been asking a fundamental question. How in the heck is that even possible? As the name of this technique suggests, it is performed at an extremely close distance. An inch is not much more than 2.5 centimeters. But then, apparently without gaining any momentum, Bruce Lee's hand darts forward and breaks through the opponent's wooden board as effortlessly as if it were made of paper. Another time, Bruce Lee's opponent falls backward with full caracho after the hit, and can be glad someone was wise enough to put a chair behind him. The force unleashed by the 1-inch punch seems so incredible that some people inevitably wonder if we're dealing with a setup here. Have the boards been rigged in advance and the opponents instructed to fall over as spectacularly as possible? Fortunately, we're not alone in wondering what's behind the 1-inch punch. Scientists also wanted to find out what the legendary punch was all about. And even in the run-up to their investigations, they reached a central conclusion. To understand how the 1-inch punch works, we don't have to delve into the world of supernatural forces, but into the realm of physics. Force and momentum. Hand on heart, any normal mortal would first pull his fist back a good bit before punching. However, most ordinary mortals probably don't know the exact background of the physical concept of force and momentum either. When two objects interact in some way, for example, by pushing against each other, we can model this interaction as a force. If object A pushes on object B, then B pushes back on A with an equally strong force. We should always keep in mind that the force is a property of the interaction, not the property of the object. The force that now acts on an object changes its momentum. This is again a fundamental physical quality that characterizes the mechanical state of motion of an object. The faster the object moves and the greater its mass, the greater its momentum. Consequently, motionless objects have zero momentum. Before we get to the 1-inch punch, we need to add another aspect to our mini physics course, and this has to do with the nature of objects. In a nutshell, things are made up of other things. If we want, we can model a tennis ball as a single object. But strictly speaking, this is not the whole truth. In detail, the ball is composed of many parts, of molecules, which in turn are composed of atoms. When a single force acts on the tennis ball, it actually leads to a multitude of interactions between an incalculable number of atoms. Of systems and centers of gravity. However, since hardly any physicist wants to deal with such a large number of interactions, it is possible for the sake of simplicity to define the ball as one object. However, it is still necessary to define a system. This can only consist of a tennis ball and thus its momentum, and all the forces based on external interactions. However, it is also possible to have a system consisting of more than one object. This is the case, for example, when a tennis ball is attached to a soccer ball by a string. Since the mass of the soccer ball is greater, the center of mass along the string would be closer to it and farther from the tennis ball. And wouldn't you know it, humans are also made of a lot of stuff that have a center of mass. From a physical point of view, however, the human body can quickly become confusing. It can change shape by positioning its limbs differently. Roughly, however, we can assume that the center of mass of a standing person is somewhere between the navel and the spine. For a seated person, the center of mass shifts a little closer to the chest due to bent legs. The physics behind the punch. Now let's set up a system for the one punch that consists of a hitter and a punched. We can call these two components Bruce and Joe, in reference to a famous video in which Bruce Lee demonstrates his famous punch to Joe Louis. Essentially, physicists focus their evaluation on two forces, the the gravitational force pulling downward, and the interaction between the ground and the system. And what about the system's center of mass? Well, as Joe falls onto the chair after being hit, the center of mass also moves to the right. It is still between Bruce and Joe, but its position has also moved down. So since Joe has fallen on the chair, the overall height of the system has also decreased. But what force causes the center of mass to move to the right and the velocity to increase? Well, the answer goes by the name of friction. As soon as Bruce executes his 1-inch punch, there is a friction force between the ground and his feet that pushes to the right. Exactly this friction force catapults, thereby also the center of mass to the right. If Bruce Lee would have been on an ice surface during the punch, there would be no external force by friction. Although Joe would still move to the right as a result of the punch, but Bruce would rebound to the left so that the center of mass would be fixed horizontally. The technology. So much for our physical excursion. But what use is the knowledge about impulses, centers of gravity, and friction if the background of this technique remains hidden? How is it possible that Bruce Lee gets the described effects rolling just by a short arm movement? Well, the answer is he doesn't. In truth, so many things happen within fractions of a second that we don't even notice them at first glance. Because what initially looks like a single blow is actually the movement of the entire body. It all starts with the legs. These perform an explosive stretching out. The sudden jerk increases the rotation speed of the hips, which in turn causes the shoulder of the punching arm to shoot forward. And as Lee's shoulder whips forward, his arm gets to work. The quick and simultaneous extension of the elbow propels his fist forward. And then to add the finishing touch, a flick of the wrist just before impact further increases the speed of the fist. As soon as the punch hits, Bruce Lee pulls his fist back almost instantly. In this way, the impact time of the punch is shortened, compressing the force and making the punch all the more effective. So once the 1-inch punch hits its target, Lee has some of the largest muscles in his body combined into a tiny area. However, pure muscular strength is by no means the key driver for this legendary technique. It's coordination and timing. Since the punch is executed at an extremely short period of time, each individual segment must be completed with incredible precision. Further, Lee must time each moment of movement so perfectly that each peak acceleration immediately follows the last. The adaptation of the brain. Where coordination meets breakneck speed, you end up with another breathtaking technique. Okay, granted, this punch isn't aimed at knocking out the opponent, but rather stealing a small coin that rests on the opponent's outstretched palm. So Lee instructs his opponent to close his hand immediately as soon as it senses a movement. And yet, by the time his fingers clenched into a fist, the coin had long since passed into Lee's possession. Once coordination and speed are the keys to success, neuroscience comes into play. A few years ago, Ed Roberts of Imperial College in London conducted a study comparing the punching power of karate professionals and physically fit people with similar amounts of muscle mass. The finding that the karate experts could punch much harder than the normals was not exactly Nobel Prize worthy. However, Roberts also discovered that muscles alone were not responsible for the hard blows. After fitting the joints of the martial artists with motion tracking cameras, he found that the punches in which many peak accelerations were synchronized in a complex motion were also the most powerful. A few brain scans of the study participants later, it was also clear that the subject's strength and coordination were directly related to white matter microstructure. In this regard, Roberts stated that the altered white matter allowed for more complex cell connections in that region of the brain responsible for coordination between the muscles of the limbs. Lee's brain power is also likely to have been changed during the years of hard training. Specifically, we're dealing with the concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to fundamentally reshape itself to cope with new demands. The more often karate fighters practice their coordinated movements, the more the white matter in their motor cortex adapts. And with that, thanks for watching. Feel free to hit the like and subscribe buttons to support us for free while staying up to date. Before you take a look at the other videos in the credits, we want your opinion. What do you think about the physical and motoric background of the 1-inch punch? Did you know how many complex movements the punch is based on? We're looking forward to your comments.